Alright, to get it started, let's take a look at 3 sentences. Number 1. That's the girl, blank, has 5 siblings. Number 2. Is the boy, blank, needs to get in a university. And number 3. That's the house, blank, caught fire yesterday. If you were asked to complete these sentences using who, whom, that, or which, how would you do it? Well, these words are called relative pronouns, and relative pronouns are used in adjective clauses. So let's go back to those 3 sentences and let's try to complete them. In the first sentence, we are talking about a girl. That's the girl, so what relative pronoun can we use? That's right, we can use who. That's a girl who has 5 siblings. In number 2, we are talking about a boy, so we can use who. But notice that we can also use that for people. Here's the boy that needs to get into university. And what about number 3? That's the house. A house, so we are talking about a thing. That means that we have to use that. That's the house that caught fire yesterday. Let's now talk about the adjective clauses in these sentences. In number 1, what's the adjective clause? Who has 5 siblings? And in number 2, what's the adjective clause? That needs to get in a university. What do you think about the information presented in these clauses? Is that information important for the sentences to be complete or not? Actually, the information is important, so that means that it cannot be omitted. And they are called defining clauses. Now let's take a look at 2 more sentences. Number 1. Leonardo da Vinci, blank, painted the Mona Lisa, was an inventor. Number 2. Machu Picchu, blank, was discovered in 1911, is a world wonder. Let's try to complete number 1. We're talking about a person, Leonardo, so we have to use who. And in number 2, we are talking about a place, so it's a thing. So we want to use which. Now, one more time, let's talk about the adjective clauses. What's the adjective clause in the first sentence? It's who painted the Mona Lisa. And what about the second sentence? What's the adjective clause? Which was discovered in 1911. So one more time, the same question. Is the information important in those clauses for the sentences to be complete? What do you think? Actually, that information is not important, so it can be omitted, and they are called non-defining clauses. We have just talked about 2 types of clauses. Number 1, defining clauses, and number 2, non-defining clauses. To remember them, let's take a look at some examples. Number 1, for defining clauses we have that's the boy that was robbed. Number 2, that's the building that is going to be torn down. So what can we say here? That for people, we can use that, and for things, we can use that too. But remember that for people, we can also use who. On the other hand, non-defining clauses, let's take a look at 2 more examples. Number 1, Gal Gadot, who took part in Miss Universe in 2004, is a famous actor. Number 2, my house, which was bought last year, is being renovated. So, for people, we can use a relative pronoun who. And for things, we have to use which. But wait, for defining clauses, you said that it's also possible to use that for both, for people and things. What about non-defining clauses? Can we also use that for people and things? Actually, no, it's not possible. We can use that only when we're talking about defining clauses. So let's continue practicing by completing the following sentences. Number 1. This is a city, blank, receives the most tourists. What relative pronouns can we use to complete it? We're talking about a city that is a thing. So we want to use that, and we want to use which to make it a little bit more formal. Okay, what about number 2? Lucy is a girl, blank, lives next door to me. We're talking about a person, so what relative pronouns can we use here? Yes, we can use that, and we can use who too. Number 3. My parents are the people, blank, I admire the most. So how can we complete it? We can use a relative pronoun that because we're talking about people, so we can also use who. But notice here that we can also use a relative pronoun whom. And if we wanted to, we could even omit the relative pronoun. So we could also say my parents are the people whom I admire the most, or my parents are the people I admire the most. But how exactly do I know when to use whom or who? What's the difference between them? Well, let's talk about the difference by taking a look at some examples. Number 1, Lucy is a girl who lives next door to me. And number 2, my parents are the people whom I admire the most. Did you notice a difference? Look at number 1, the relative pronoun who refers to the subject, and in number 2, whom refers to the object. But to make it a lot easier for you to understand the difference, all you have to know is that the use of whom or who depends on whether there is a subject after the relative pronoun or not. Look at the first sentence. Notice here that there is no subject pronoun in this part. There is no she, he, or it. That means that we cannot use whom. We can only use who or that. But notice in the second sentence that after the relative pronoun whom, there is a subject pronoun. So that's why it's possible to use whom. So let's wrap this up to see if you understood. Let's take a look at these sentences and let's try to complete them. In number 1 it says, Rose lives next to a girl, blank is from Peru. So we're talking about a girl. That is, we can use who, that, and what about whom? Do you think it's possible to use whom? Actually, it's not possible because if we remember the rule said that we can only use whom if there is a subject pronoun after the relative pronoun. But look here, there is no subject pronoun. That's why it's not possible to use whom, only who or that. Alright, now look at number 2. We're still talking about Rose, so it's a person, and that means that we can use who, that, and what do you think about whom? Is it possible to use whom in this case? Yes, remember the rule. The rule says that if there is a subject pronoun after the relative pronoun, which in this case is whom, it is possible to use whom. And if it's possible to use whom, that means that it refers to the object, and we can also omit it. What about number 3? Bertha taught a class, blank lasted for an hour. We're talking about a class, a thing, so we can use that. We can also use which, and that's it. Finally, look at number 4. Bertha taught a class, blank everybody liked. We're still talking about a class, so we can use that. We can also use which. And what do you think? What else can we use here? Notice that there is a subject after the relative pronoun, so that means that we can also omit the relative pronoun. Alright, so thank you so much for watching and see you next time.